The high-handed crackdown by the Delhi police on JNU student Kanhaiya Kumar has once again ignited the debate on Section 124A, the law of sedition in this country. And one person who's fighting to scrap this law is Congress Member of Parliament from Thiruvananthapuram, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. He's now joining us live. Thank you very much for speaking with us here on CNN IBN. You have said that you will bring a private member's bill in the forthcoming session of Parliament to try and annul this law of sedition. First of all, why should we believe...
That was misreported.
Sorry.
I've already brought a private member's bill.
Okay.
I brought it in on the same occasion, the same day, as I also brought in the bill on 377, which, as you know, was rejected by the Lok Sabha, but the sedition bill was admitted, so it is live in Parliament.
Okay, so why should we then believe that a majority of members in Parliament, and certainly in your house, the Lok Sabha, would be in favor of scrapping this law?
Well, it's too early to say that we know what the rest of the Lok Sabha is going to say. I'm fairly sure that most of the opposition parties will definitely want to go along with this. As far as the ruling party is concerned, it will depend to a great extent on how and whether they decide to issue a whip or whether they just decide to leave it to the consciences of individual members. Because by and large, this is a law that has been resorted to by state governments. It's not something that the central government has used very often, and therefore it should be possible for the central government to say, do we really need it? The truth is that the Supreme Court, way back in 1962, already read the law as something that should be applied only when there is an incitement to violence. I have essentially followed the Supreme Court's lead in changing the law to make explicit what is their implicit reading, because even though the Supreme Court took such a liberal position, the sad truth is that many of the lower courts at state level have not been so strict, and we've seen, cartoonists being arrested in Bengal and Maharashtra. We've seen people being arrested for various sorts of things that no one would seriously consider to be sedition, and now there is the arrest of Kanhaiya Kumar. I think simply underscores the fact that when you have a law like this on the books, it is far too liable to misuse.
Now, it's interesting you brought up the Kedarnath versus State of Bihar case, which happened in 1962, and the Supreme Court deliberated on it. It delivered its verdict on it, in which, like you said, it's clearly said that unless there is incitement to violence, you cannot apply Section 124A. But that case itself was moved by Kedarnath Singh, challenging the very validity of Section 124A, and the Supreme Court did not strike it down. In fact, the Supreme Court's reasoning was, as long as the state exists, the law of sedition has a rationale to exist.
I was careful in my amendment not to scrap the entire law, but to define sedition very precisely as not these vague terms of disaffection and bringing the government into disrepute and so on, but rather very specifically any action that would call for incitement to violence or actually call for violence itself. That would be something that could come under the sedition law, whereas when you have the present law, it is so loosely worded that any trigger-happy policeman or any careless judge or simply somebody who likes locking up people for what they say could actually use it.
Okay,
My
so I just want to
would not permit them to use it that way.
I just want to be very clear. You are not calling for a scrapping of this law. You are only asking for more caveats to be added in where this law can be used.
I'm basically narrowing the definition of sedition to link it explicitly to calls for violence. Short of that, I don't see any need for a sedition law. But if somebody makes a speech, for example, saying we should rise up in arms against the government of India and overthrow it, that would be still sedition, yes.
But the Supreme Court has already added that caveat, right, in multiple judgments, not least Kedarnath Singh versus the State of Bihar case, where it said sedition can only be applied when there is an incitement to violence.
But, not every case gets to the Supreme Court. And if lower level courts have not used the Supreme Court standard, then you find situations like the cartoonist Asim Trivedi being arrested or the student leader Kanhaiya Kumar being arrested. These are the kinds of things that shouldn't be happening if the judge authorizing the arrest had actually followed the Supreme Court's directive.
Okay. Now, I want to move beyond the legal to the political, and what we've been witnessing in JNU, the arrest of Kanhaiya Kumar, the debate on the sedition law that's been reignited. I mean, what politically, and you're a politician, you're a member of parliament, it doesn't seem to make sense to any of us. What is it that the BJP and the ruling government are trying to gain, at least politically, from this? I mean, this reductionist binary narrative of either you're a nationalist or you're an anti-national, either you're a patriot or you're a traitor. I mean, what is it for? Is it for the upcoming elections in your state as well as in the state of Bengal, or what is it? What does it help achieve?
I know. I think it's part of a political project to capture the universities. I'm sorry to say this because it has often been alleged, going right back to the very first time the Jansangh entered a coalition government in Madhya Pradesh way back in 1967, it's often been said that the real portfolios that the RSS have wanted to bring to heel have been those relating to education, and that the real interest is in ensuring that the universities become, if you like, no longer hotbeds of dissent or of free thinking or of lively intellectual contention, but rather that they conform to a certain vision of the nation that the ruling dispensation today would like to promote. That is the only rational explanation for a series of things that seem to be happening, ranging from the appointment of vice-chancellors who are deemed to be sympathetic to their point of view, to the treatment of students who espouse a different point of view, as we've just seen at JNU, to the discrediting of certain kinds of thought. You know, I don't happen to have much sympathy for communists, for communism as an ideology. We are fighting it in my state. But at the same time, we would find it ridiculous to proscribe that as somehow dangerous to the survival of the state. In our country, all sorts of ideas have always been allowed to flourish. And I remember the kind of perverse satisfaction I would get in America, explaining that, look, we're a country where every kind of political thought, including communism, can be taken seriously and have a realistic chance in the political fray, whereas in America your political contention is merely reduced to Tweedledum and Tweedledee with the Democrats and the Republicans. I would say we are far more democratic in that sense. But it seems to me shocking that we are now discrediting or delegitimizing the kinds of points of view that in many respects are unexceptionable and have been around in our country since independence.
It's interesting you bring in the example of America. America has scrapped the sedition law. Britain has scrapped the sedition law. Do you think the onus is on India, and especially so in the light of events of the last week or so, that we should start, if you have to be a progressive democracy, if you have to be a progressive liberal democracy or a progressive liberal society, then there shouldn't be place in such societies and such democracies for a law which, like you said, has been repeatedly misused by state agencies for criticism of the state, not necessarily criticism of the nation.
Exactly, and the truth is that that is a distinction that liberals make, but illiberal people don't. That you can actually criticize both the government of India and the Indian state, but as long as you don't call for people taking up arms against it, what you're doing is absolutely permissible within the limits of democratic discourse. And yet, somehow, even thinking along these things is deemed to be anti-national. I'm shocked about the Zakka because I believe India is strong enough. We're not some sort of feeble country that we or our nation will be destroyed by a few immature students shouting irresponsible slogans. Let them do it, let them vent off steam. Very many of them grow up to become somewhat embarrassed by their youthful excesses. But even if they don't, this is something we should allow universities to do. It's a great place for you to experiment with all sorts of ideas and come up with your own sensible conclusions. Most university radicals I have known have actually ended up being quite conservative later in life. And I can name people like Shopan Dasgupta and Chandan Mitra from my own time in college. So these were both flaming left-wingers in our university days. I mean, people change, people evolve. Don't sort of threaten children. The students are basically very young people with charges of sedition that carry life imprisonment and so on. It's absurd. It denies the possibility of evolution, of their own growing up and changing. It denies the very possibility that in a university we allow all sorts of ideas to contend and flourish, and at the end of it people come out with more expanded minds. That's what university should be all about. That's what democracy is all about. And I'm really disappointed that our so-called nationalists are diminishing our nation by implying it is so weak and so feeble that a few slogans are going to somehow destroy our nation. Come on, we can take this in stride.
It's interesting you bring up the examples of Chandan Mitra and Sopan Das Gupta, your contemporaries, in your university days, but now you're on two ends of the political spectrum. They say if you're not a communist when you're 20, you don't have a heart. If you're not a conservative by the time you're 40, you don't have a head. But anyway, that aside, how would you then describe you have said our country is not so feeble that a few slogan-shouting students should suddenly become a national security threat, but the state using laws in its books against these kids repeatedly when there doesn't seem to be evidence of any kind of seditious activity in Jawaharlal Nehru University, that is a threat to the idea of India.
Absolutely. My point is that, in fact, it is not the slogan shouting that can destroy India. It's undermining our own democratic ethos that can truly undermine India. Look, I'm proud of the nation. I wear the national flag with pride every single day on every item of clothing that I wear outside. The flag that so many of our soldiers have fought for, that Lance Naik Hanumantappa just gave his life for after a brave struggle. This is a flag that stands for a great deal. It doesn't stand for some petty jingoist chauvinism. It stands for freedom, for democracy, for humanity, for social justice. It stands for all of those things as well as for pride in nationhood. I think it seems to me that what is lacking here is the kind of large-heartedness, the kind of big imagination that true nationalism should engender. It should be a wide-ranging definition of nationalism that embraces both Krishna Kanhaiya and Kanhaiya Kumar. And sadly, that's not what we are seeing in the current discourse coming out of the government and its supporters.
And what do you make of this new directive by the government that the flag has to be flown prominently and proudly at a central location in all universities across the country?
Look, I actually don't mind that at all. I mean, you know, it's obviously an unfortunate timing because of all this, but the very fact that the flag flies, it's something we can all point to with pride as Indians in our own country's campuses. It's very common in many other foreign countries. Americans have their flag flying everywhere. And Naveen Jindal, my Congress Party colleague, is the one who went to the Supreme Court and won for Indians the right to fly the flag. So I'm all in favor of it. I wear the flag pin, and I'm very glad if we can see the flag flying more and more from more buildings, starting with the universities. There are even government ministries where you can't see the flag flying. It's a shame. Let's have the flag fly. But let us understand what that flag stands for. It doesn't stand for narrow-mindedness, bigotry, and intolerance. It stands for a very large version of Indian nationalism, a vision of Indian nationalism. That's the country that Gandhiji and Nehruji fought to free, and it's a country that, frankly, we should all be proud of, irrespective of our political affiliation.
Okay, and one final word before we let you go. What do you make of mainstream television channels that have now it appears in hindsight, have run doctored videos, possibly leaked by the Delhi police, and just to defame this kid who's been picked up on flimsy charges, and to brandish kids as terrorists even before they've been given the due process of law? What is that?
I've said it before. Yeah. I've said it before in a different context, and I'll say it again. This rush to have breaking news has become the besetting curse of our national media, particularly television media. The most elementary fact-checking is not being done. Well, many television channels, maybe I can't blame everyone equally, but as the bad line goes, the reason that television is called a medium is because it's neither rare nor well done. And certainly in India, that's why you guys are a medium generally. I'm not blaming your specific channel, Zach. I don't know which channel showed this video, but basic fact-checking before you rush to air something is not being done. We have all these irresponsible discussions going on every evening with preposterous and presumptuous claims that the nation wants to know something, that the nation actually would rather know the truth than know the kinds of lies and unfounded opinions that some people have been propagating. I think it's extremely important that the media recognize it has a responsibility to society, and that responsibility consists of at least doing its own homework. Do your fact-checking before you unleash something on an unsuspecting public which has no choice but to trust you. You have the means of seeing whether an audio track has been added on. The public watching on TV doesn't. Please don't mislead the public. I plead to your colleagues, let the media be an important contributor to our society's civilized conversation about politics and not an instrument of character assassination, which it has too often been.
Okay, I'll just once again vehemently reiterate, some television media, some channels, because I think
okay. Point taken.
just like not every politician is the same. But thank you very much for your articulate views as always, and we'll keep an eye out on your private members bill and the fate of that bill, whether or not it gets passed in Parliament. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Tharoor, this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Speaking to us about a wide range of issues. He's of course moved a private members bill already, which seeks to add more caveats to Section 124A, the law of sedition. We'll see how that bill plays itself out and the fate of that bill in Parliament.